Friends and colleagues, welcome to this event on the margins of the 43rd UN Human Rights Council session that we're very happy to be holding here today despite the coronavirus. And today we'll be speaking about the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia, precisely about the PR offensive and the cosmetic reforms in view or in order to whitewash human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia. And we see this really as a very dangerous trend or development, that the authorities are heavily investing in the sports industry, the entertainment industry. We've seen superficial, sort of minimal reforms by the authorities, such as allowing women to drive and to apply for their passport, to travel without the permission of their male guardians. But as I said, these are superficial reforms. They don't really go to the core of the issue. The male guardianship system persists. And at the same time, we're also seeing like a harsher crackdown on freedom of expression, peaceful critics, and we're seeing new waves of arrest. We're also witnessing the ongoing unfair trials of peaceful activists, such as the women human rights defenders, some of whom are still in detention and facing unfair trials, or others, human rights defenders such as Mohammed al-Otaibi, or clerics like Salman al-Oda and Hassan al-Maliki, who the prosecutors have demanded the death penalty because they're failing to show loyalty to the regime. And we're also seeing a continued impunity for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. 2019 has as well seen the highest number in recent years of individuals executed in Saudi Arabia, 185 executed mostly on charges related to selling or abuse of drugs. Charges that basically also do not meet the international threshold of the most serious crimes. Minors continue to be executed in Saudi Arabia. The war in Yemen continues with the Saudi coalition committing violations to international human rights law and humanitarian law, indiscriminate bombing of civilian infrastructure. So what we're trying to do here today is to really show the stark contrast between the narrative that the Saudi authorities are trying to promote of a modernizing state that is opening up to the international community and the harsh human rights reality on the ground. And I'm really pleased to be joined by this great panel today. We have human rights defenders, individuals concerned because members of their families are actually suffering rights abuses in Saudi Arabia at the moment, as well as by a representative from the European Parliament. And without further ado, I think I will give the floor to Arish al-Sadhan, who's the sister of humanitarian Red Crescent worker Abdurrahman al-Sadhan, who was disappeared in Saudi Arabia nearly 2 years ago. Arish, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you everyone for being here today. So my name is Arija Sadhan. I'm the sister of detained humanitarian aid worker Abdurrahman Sadhan. This month marks 2 years since my brother Abdurrahman had been detained, or rather kidnapped, from his work at the Red Crescent office in Riyadh, and disappeared ever since. For 2 years, me and my family have been living in distress, not knowing where my brother has gone, and our fears and stress got worse after the increasing reports of human rights violations in the kingdom, especially after the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, wondering every day if my brother is still alive or not. We lived through this for 23 months until a few weeks ago, when my brother was finally allowed a 1-minute call. And he spoke briefly to my family in Riyadh to assure us he is alive. We cried. For the first time in 2 years, tears of happiness. it felt like we can finally breathe. During these 2 years, I received threats and messages of intimidation, even rumors insisting that my brother, among few others who disappeared, were killed under torture. Unfortunately, many people took that as a fact, which made our pain a lot worse. But I never gave up on my brother, and I will never will. I know in my heart he is still alive. I know he is not okay. I know he is suffering, but he is alive. Enforced disappearance, unfortunately, have become a systematic practice in Saudi Arabia. My brother Abdurrahman is only one of many who suffered disappearance, some for few months, like several women rights activists, others for years, like my brother Abdurrahman, who is a humanitarian aid worker, and 2 journalists. Marwan al-Maraisi was disappeared for 1 year, and another journalist, Turki al-Jasser, who was detained around the same time as my brother and disappeared for almost 2 years as well. No doubt their families and many others have lived through similar hell as we did. Their kidnap and disappearance is not only hurting them and our families, but also sending a chilling message to all humanitarian aid communities and journalist organizations that their workers are not safe and their organizations are not respected. International human rights standards states that no arrest can be made without a legal basis and that defendants cannot be held without being brought promptly before a judge. And clearly, nowhere in any human rights law permits enforced disappearance or depriving detainees from calls or visitations by their families. Regardless, there is no justifications for detaining anyone without a warrant and holding them in commando, depriving them any communication or legal rights just over tweets or peaceful opinions. While the West uses social media to promote free speech and bringing the world together, Saudi is misusing these tools to intimidate people, restrict free speech, hack and hunt down critics, then imprison and torture them. So far, 3 American companies have been affected as a result of Saudi attempts to crack down on freedom of speech. What message does that send to these international tech companies? Would they want to invest in a country that doesn't share their values? Saudi officials keep denying practicing any torture. If that was true, then why do they practice enforced disappearance? Why do they deprive detainees from their legal rights, such as family visitations or assigning a lawyer? Enforced disappearance is just another form of torture, not only to the detainees, but also to their families. Saudi trolls keeps telling me that I'm making a mistake by talking, and silence is the only solution. How would silence fix anything? In civilized societies, when there is a problem, you call it out and talk about it to find solutions. If you stay silent, then that means you are either ignorant or you don't care about your country or your organization. For a full year before speaking out, we sent endless letters and faxes. We knocked endless doors. We reached out to every possible Saudi organization and personnel, but all our efforts were to no avail. We submitted pages after pages to the Saudi Human Rights Commission and other Saudi agencies, but to our surprise, they have done nothing. Apparently, we're not the only ones. It appears other families have suffered the same. So, what is really the purpose of the Human Rights Commission in Saudi? Is it there to protect human rights or just a cover-up for abuses? Saudi is spending tons of money on PR campaigns to improve its image. But the world is not blind. Human rights record in Saudi Arabia will only improve by taking real visible actions. starting with freeing peaceful critics and activists, and by having more tolerance towards freedom of speech, especially now that Saudi Arabia is opening its doors to the world. As G20 is approaching, it will be a smart and important step to correct these human rights abuses beforehand. Releasing all peaceful critics and human rights activists and compensating them for all the damages they have suffered as a result of their imprisonment will sure have a huge impact on improving Saudi Arabia's image, more than spending any crazy amount of money on shallow PR campaigns. We are here talking about these issues because we care about human rights. We talk because we care about Saudi Arabia. And we talk because morally it's not correct to stay silent. Princess Rima Al Saud have mentioned in recent interview that Saudi Arabia, like any other country, is not perfect. And she is right. No country is perfect. No one is perfect. But there are those who thrive to be better. And that's why we talk and raise these issues, because we want Saudi Arabia to be better. 2 years is a sentence by itself for no crime. We and other families have suffered greatly. And I hope Saudi officials and leaders have the compassion to put themselves in our place and understand where we come from. Rest assured that I'm not going to stop until my brother is free and back among his family. I ask human rights organizations and world leaders to take a serious stand against such human rights abuses, as I don't want anyone to go through what we are going through. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arish, and thank you also for being so brave to speak up or to speak out, because I think what we really know in Saudi Arabia is that the authorities are prone to repress anyone speaking out, and people are really afraid of reprisals, and some families are actually considering to keep silent. But I think what we've learned over the last months and years is that this does not improve the situation of individuals detained. Thank you for your speech. And now I'd like to move to Lina Al-Hathloul, sister of detained women's rights activist and human rights activist Lujain Al-Hathloul, who's been in prison in Saudi Arabia, almost 2 years. The anniversary is nearing as well. I'll pass it on to you to tell us more.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Julia. Yes, I'm the sister of Lujain Al-Hathloul. Lujain is a women's rights activist. She was known for 3 main fights. First, to lift the ban made on women to drive. The second was the whole guardianship system, which basically puts women under a guardian, and they're considered as minors till the end of their lives. And her third fight was to open a shelter for abused women. Her campaign began in 2013-2014, and her first imprisonment was when she tried to cross the border in 2014, and she was imprisoned for 73 days. Without a trial, without anything, she just got out. Once she got out of prison, she understood that it's not only about driving, it's the whole system that needs to be changed. And so she began her activism to put down the male guardianship system, basically. After that, she got arrested a couple of times in Saudi Arabia in 2016, 2017 for interrogations. And it was nothing too bad. In February 2018, she attended a meeting to breathe with the UN CEDAW committee on the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia. A couple of days later, when she got back to the Middle East in the Emirates, she got kidnapped in March 2018 on the highway in the Emirates. She was brought back to Saudi Arabia against her will. They didn't tell her why. They just said that it was it came from orders, official orders. Once she got back, they put her in a jail for a couple of days in Saudi Arabia, and again for interrogations. They got her out, but they put her on a travel ban. So from March 2018 till May 2018, she was on a travel ban. In May 2018, without a warrant, without anything, Saudi officials broke into our house, took Lujain, didn't give my family or Lujain any reason, and we didn't have any information for a month, approximately, a bit less. After that, we found out she was saying that she was in a hotel or unofficial prison at least. And afterwards, when the visits began in August 2018, my parents saw her, and it was obvious she was being tortured during that time. The visits began. There was no trial for 10 months. In March 2019, the trial began. They gave her the charges. The charges are basically her activism. It's contacting foreign journalists regarding human rights issues, contacting human rights organizations, contacting diplomats. Even part of the charges is that she contacted the EU delegation in Saudi Arabia, that she contacted people in the Netherlands embassy in Saudi Arabia, the UK embassy in Saudi Arabia. And all of this because she wanted to talk about human rights, because that's what an activist does. The trial began in March 2019, and it got suspended in April 2019. We didn't know why. And when they suspended it, she was held in solitary confinement till beginning of this month, beginning of February. So she was in solitary confinement for 8 months without having any reason of why the trial was suspended. And now they began with the trial again, but there's nothing new, and it's a fake trial because all the procedures are violated. When she tries to ask them for proofs, they won't do it. When she tries to really give her defense, they just stop her from talking. So basically everything is, all her rights are violated. So this is my sister's story, and later on with the questions, maybe we can talk about how things are going on regarding women's rights in Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Lina. And yeah, I think that this testimony already really shows us that the authorities are not genuine about wanting to reform anything, and that it's just somewhat a cover-up and giving women the right to drive and other liberties, while actually detaining the very same women that initially demanded these rights, and holding them without proper procedures, and charging them with human rights activism. I would like now to move to Francesca Gabanati, who is the assistant of the European Member of Parliament, Ms. Alessandra Moretti, who unfortunately is not able to join us, but Alessandra Moretti is a member of the European Parliament for the Social and Democrats group, and is also sitting on the Committee for the Rights of the Women and Gender Equality, and has raised a very interesting question, a written question about the participation of European states at the G20 in Saudi, in case that Mohammed bin Salman is presiding that meeting. So yeah, I'll pass it on to Francesca. Thank you very much.
Okay, hello everybody. So my name is Francesca Garbagnati, and I work at the European Parliament with Alessandra Moretti, an Italian member. Unfortunately, she can't be here today, so I will bring you her words. I will read it. I'm sorry. In recent years, we got used to the story of a young prince who offers freedoms and progress. Saudi Arabia would invite Disney movies if only this story stood up. Instead, it is in the news the one that manages to escape from the taking of oppression of dictatorship which opens our eyes to reality. Yes, there is a young crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who actually boasts social reforms in front of international partners, but about rights and freedoms that we call fundamental, we cannot even see a shadow. Saudi citizens and the many foreigners living in the kingdom continue to be dominated by a regime that prohibits freedom of expression, association, the right to have a fair and equitable trial, and which clearly prevents gender equality. Since presenting the Vision 2030 project in 2016 that aims to change completely the face of the kingdom, Mohammed bin Salman has done everything to transmit behind the borders the image of a modern country, which would soon become a locomotive for all countries in the region, guiding them on the track of progress. Detaching from dependence on oil, certainly not to save the planet, but rather to save the boundless riches, is a project that many liked. But his charisma as a businessman alone was not enough to gain the trust of foreign investors intimidated by social situation in the country. For this reason, the prince has introduced a system of reforms with the aim of unhinging the age-old society that cannot go hand in hand with the technological power model that should become Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, the method used was the one of the stick and the carrot. For every right granted, the application of which remains questionable, the regime imposes a squeeze on dissidents. An example are women's rights activists, in particular the ones who fought for the right to drive. They were arrested and detained in prison, even while the world congratulated the regime for giving women the right to drive. What the Saudi Crown Prince proposed is nothing more than a restyling of the image with which he presents himself abroad. Nevertheless, hiding the dust under the carpet is not a good basis to build international relations, or at least it should not be. It is urgent to raise an international conscience that does not just look at what is happening on the surface, but that looks deeper into the enormous contradiction that Mohammed bin Salman has fueled in the recent years. On one side, an openness towards women's rights and culture. On the other, the tightening against human rights activists and journalists has become increasingly suffocating. The international community, starting with the United Nations, but also European Union, that I represent here, cannot come to terms with a regime that systematically violates human rights. It is unacceptable to see rights and freedoms sacrificed on the altar of economic, commercial, and energy interests. It is unacceptable that hosting a football game can erase the atrocities that hide the regime behind this discordant air of progress. What worries me, in fact, in addition to the hard punch of the Saudi dictatorship, is Western hypocrisy. We fight for rights. We call for a ceasefire in the war areas, such as Yemen, where is taking place the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. Yet, when it comes to interests, one eye is closed, sometimes even both. Some time ago, I heard the testimony of a Yemeni activist said that most of the people who live in the country do not even know where Europe is located, but they know its name and the countries because of the inscription found on the remains of the weapons abandoned on the ground. In European Parliament, one of the issues that Mrs. Moretti and I deal is gender equality. We strive to ensure that women within the Union could enjoy the same rights and opportunity as men, but we also committed to ensure that gender issues are included in all Union policies, including foreign affairs and international trade agreements. Human rights and freedoms are a cardinal value of the European Union, to which all other policies must be conditioned. For this reason, in order for the European Union to develop relations with Saudi Arabia, it is imperative that the Gulf monarchy do not only publicize reforms, but also really grants rights to the population. I'd like to remember that despite the small steps presented in recent years, the tutoring system still forces women to live like little girls under the control of an adult male. They are not allowed to influence the growth of children, have legal custody of them, or pass their citizenship. With rare exceptions, it is not allowed to request documents or undertake journeys unless accompanied and they cannot even make decisions regarding their health or marriage. These denied rights go behind social tradition or religious norms. It is simply a way imposed by the regime to maintain control over women, a control system that the European Union cannot accept. However, not only women suffer the repression of the regime. The case that in recent years has shaken international public opinion and in many cases has shown a spotlight on the human rights situation in the country is that of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist, columnist for the Washington Post and critic of the royal family, killed in his country's consulate in Istanbul. An extrajudicial execution by the Saudi regime, which, driven by international pressure, thought it could be resolved the matter by conducting a closed-door trial that led to the conviction of 11 people, without, however, touching the figures closest to Mohammed bin Salman, who, according to the international investigation, were the driving force behind the operation. We cannot accept this manipulated reconstruction. We must insist to reach the truth. We owe it to Jamal, his fiancée, and all the journalists and activists who risk their lives every day to defend the truth. Another example we should never forget is Raif Badawi's story, the Saudi blogger arrested for creating a site for debating social and political issues. Sentenced in 2015 to 10 years in prison and 1,000 frustrated, Badawi is still in prisons. In 2015, the European Parliament awarded him the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought, an award that the institution assigns every year to those who stand out in the fight for freedom of expression. His wife had to come to Strasbourg to collect the prize. The G20 summit in Saudi Arabia is scheduled for November this year, a meeting where the greatest world powers will meet together to discuss the future of the region, the new global political balances, technology, and innovation, topics in which Saudi Arabia feels winning. The Saudi presidency agenda for the G20 was presented in 3 points. First, empowering people, so creating conditions in which everyone, especially, they say, women and young people, can live and work. Definitely an ambitious goal, considering that women are forced to seek permission from their guardian even for the simplest actions. Second, safeguarding the planet, even if the Saudi royal family has built that continues to feed financial empires. Thank you. Even thanks to the oil revenues. Shaping new frontiers, which means adopting strategies based on technological innovation, while continuing to tighten the grip of those who spread information and knowledge that is not in line with the fairy tale transmitted by the regime. We cannot offer a silver platter to Mohammed bin Salman the opportunity to show itself to the world as a champion of the world in the process of modernization, where reality is very different. His country has taken on the role of a locomotive for all the neighbors of the region, but the tracks on which it travels are not those of progress, but those of the violation of rights and the denial of freedoms, hidden by a thin veil of apparent development. The European Union must play an important role in this matter and must be able to tackle the problem with one voice. Unfortunately, even in this case, it reflects how the interest of individual states prevails on the desire to establish a common European line. Many member states benefit from bilateral agreements with Saudi Arabia, including for the export of weapons that Saudis used to perpetrate the massacre of civilians in Yemen. Last month, I prepared a question Mrs. Moretti, prepared a question with a request for written answer to the Vice President of the European Commission and a High Representative of European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Joseph Borrell. With this text, I asked to turn the attention of the Vice President and the whole European Commission to the issue on organizing the G20 in Saudi Arabia. Considering the unequivocal results of the investigation by Agnes Kalamar, UN Special Rapporteur on the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, evidences that the chain of command for the execution leads directly to Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and considering that these tragic and bloody events constitutes the tip of the iceberg of a crackdown against all forms of political dissident, how can leaders of Western democracies meet under the presidency of the Crown Prince? How can the representatives of the European Union, the cradle of human rights, legitimize the instigator of heinous crimes as president of one of the most important summits in the world? I say that it cannot. The usurpation of rights, the repression of freedom, enforced disappearances, secret trials and extrajudicial executions cannot be allowed to remain unpunished. We must all together, European Parliament, UN, NGOs and civil society, combat impunity in Saudi Arabia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca. I think it's quite encouraging to hear such clear words of criticism about the situation in Saudi Arabia from the European Parliament, because I think, we need to remind ourselves what we're up against here. It's the Saudi regime. They have resources. We're the civil society, and obviously if they invest so much into a different narrative, then we have a big job to do as well. And it's one thing that, you can buy artists and you can buy sports clubs to come and whitewash your image. But also I think from us, the experience we have as civil society is that even some diplomats now start believing that the situation is really improving inside Saudi Arabia. They're like, oh yeah, we hear people suddenly being, satisfied with the reforms and happy and encouraging. And if it gets to that level, it kind of shows us again, as I said, what we're up against. And maybe Yahya, he can tell us a bit more and also give some suggestions and recommendations to the international community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you very much for all the panelists and for the co-sponsor, Right Livelihood and FIDH. And thank you very much for everyone here. Honestly, the main issue at the moment is that Saudi Arabia, they continue the violations, and the record at the moment is in the worst scenario at all. We are going from worse to worse. And in the same time, they are paying large amount of money to cover up all of these stories. And lots of people around the world, they believe the Saudi PR, or they want to believe it. They try to believe it. We remember MBS before he came Crown Prince. He paid large amount of money for the PR, and he success with that. And it was the only successful campaign for the Saudi regime to do PR for MBS. And after he came a Crown Prince, lots of people around the world, they were waiting for the reformer, because he told the people he's a reformer, he's going to change the country. And we heard lots of politicians around the world, including Macron and Theresa May in UK, and lots of people, they called him the reformer. And they said he's going to bring the change. And we have seen big signs around London saying, this man going to bring the change to Saudi Arabia. And what was the change? It was more violations, and not in just one aspect, but in everything. If we talk about execution, for example, The executions increased last year to 185. And he promised a lot of people around the world. He said, okay, we will have solution for the execution and we will decrease the number until we ban the execution in Saudi Arabia. But last year, it was 185. And this is the largest number since 10 years. So it's increased dramatically. And they executed 37 persons just in one time, in one day. They executed in last year, 37 persons in one day, including minors. And 2 years ago, also under the rule for MBS, they executed 47 persons in one day. And also after he became a crown prince, they started the war in Yemen, and they made the worst situation, humanitarian situation in the world. They made it in Yemen. This is after MBS came to power. And they arrested all the human rights defenders. In Saudi Arabia, we used to have repression. It's always dictator regime, but in the past, they used to arrest some human rights defenders and released some and give pardon for some, asking some to sign pleas, try to silence some. So the mission for the regime in the past, trying to silence people. At the moment, it's not trying to silence people. It's trying to punish the people and to take revenge from them. Even some people, they have been silenced for a while. They arrested them again, take them to the prison again, and they tortured them severely. And the torture at the moment, it's completely different than the torture before. We always have torture in Saudi Arabia, but what's happened recently, especially for the human rights defenders, including Lujain al-Hidlul, including Abdurrahman al-Sadhan, something, it's really weird. It's something, we don't used to have that in Saudi Arabia, especially for the human rights defenders. They used to have torture, but usually people committed violence because nobody, or people, they will be afraid to defend those people, even if they have rights. But there is no cover-up for these stories. But at the moment, it's sexual harassment. They hang people in the ceiling. They use electric shock. They do everything. And I was telling my friends this morning, they took one of the women, they took her by ambulance to somewhere in the street, and they took her out of the ambulance. She didn't know where is she because they covered her eyes, and they told her, we will execute you now. This is some types of the torture in Saudi Arabia. And other women, they told her, if you answer the questions in the investigation, we will allow you tomorrow to have 2 hours to go to your home. She didn't understand what they mean. And next day, they told her, okay, you have 2 hours to go to home. Then they said, okay, just one question before you go out. You will have 2 hours to go to home. She don't understand what they mean by 2 hours to go to home. They said, okay, one question. Then they start to investigate her again. With the investigation, the investigator, he said to her, okay, you don't answer the questions. I can't give you the 2 hours. I will try my best to give it tomorrow. And they keep doing that for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, he said to her, look, I don't want to tell you that, but you don't answer the questions, and I'm still struggling. I can't give you the 2 hours, but your kids, they had car accident and they died and they are in the hospital. I want you to have 2 hours to see the bodies for your children before they burn them. And later on, after 1 month from forced disappearance, when she had phone call, she recognized that her children, they are fine, they have not died. But she was crying all the night, she was crying all the time because she believed her kids had car accident and they died. So the torture at the moment, it's really extreme, it's something really unbelievable. And we heard lots of officials and sometimes NGOs asking, if there is pressure on the regime, if we highlight the cases for the victims, is that going to affect them or if that's going to support them? Of course, it will go to support them because all of these stories, it's happened while we don't know about it. And we don't speak about it because we don't know about it. So if we know about it, we must highlight it, we must talk about it. And regime, they're still playing with their narrative. They are saying to people at the moment, try to be silent because we want to do reform. We want to stop some violations, but if you pressure us, that will put our image in front of our people bad. So try to be silent because we want to do the reform. We want to free some prisoner of conscience. But when you be silent, this is just playing game. And we need to ask the question, is the regime childs like that? If we talk, they are going to torture people more, and they are going to take revenge from those people, and they want to do the violations without anyone talk. They success with the PR before Mohammed bin Salman came crown prince. After he came crown prince, we have noticed that the PR led us to more violations. At the moment, because they are waiting for the G20, they back to the PR again, and we have sport wash, and they tried their best to have mission from Saudi Arabia visiting everyone. They visited also parties in Europe, also small parties in different countries in Europe, they visited them. Lots of people, when I see any officials or politicians in Europe, they told me, yeah, we met with the Saudis and they told us this and this and that. So they have at the moment very big mission for PR to tell the new narrative for the regime. The new narrative at the moment, they are saying at the moment, yeah, we are reviewing our legal system and we are going to reform it, and we will have some great progress, and we will have it soon. Just wait. Wait until when? Until the G20. And after the G20, they will go back. And nothing stopped at the moment. And as the panelists mentioned, the first step for the reform, free the prisoner of conscience. There's no need to think about it. There is prisoner of conscience. They are behind bars and they face the torture. First step, free them. Then we will think about the rest of the reform. But there is no credibility for the regime. And unfortunately, lots of people, they still want to believe the regime, and they're still trying to be silent. And when we ask them, why you don't take any position, why you don't say anything, why you don't be vocal, they said, okay, we have strategic relation with Saudi Arabia, and we are using this strategic relation to advise them, and we are not in good situation to say that vocal. And the regime, when they have meeting, for example, with any foreign minister or prime minister anywhere, and they have meeting and human rights not mentioned, they will use that for their PR, and they will use it for more violations. And we have seen the regime when they are doing violations after violations. It's not just in single place or with single aspect, but it's in everything. The war in Yemen, the murder for Jamal Khashoggi, the torture for the women rights activists and other activists, the increasing the death penalty, the execution for minors. Also, they asking at the moment for execution for religious figures because they are different, only because they are different. And they said that, they mentioned that clearly in the charges against Salman al-Auda and Hassan Farha al-Malki. They said they have religious opinion is different than our scholars. By having religious opinion different than the Saudi scholars, to be different than the Wahhabism, does that mean you deserve death penalty? This is what they are saying. And unfortunately, I heard from some politicians, they are saying we are not justifying the execution or asking for death penalty for those people, but maybe they are extreme. Those people, they signed petition asking for human rights. They signed with us asking for democracy. They support the human rights. Who's the extreme? Is the extreme people who ask for reform, supporting for the human rights and supporting the democracy, or the regime using the differences to execute people? I believe if you don't accept the differences between people, this is the core for the extremism, and the extremism is still there inside the regime itself, and they still spread that between the people, and still spread between the people the hate speech. They still divided people inside the country. They still arresting people because their religious opinion and their political opinion. So on the ground, the reality, they are going from wars to wars, but in the media, they are amazing. They are doing lots of reform just in the media, just in the papers, just with the PR companies who want to believe. There is people, their interest to believe because they want to sell weapons and they want to keep good relations with Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, because Saudi Arabia have lots of money. And because they have lots of money, they are using this money. Nobody asks about it. They are using that in corruption. So they are paying large amount of money for corrupted, contract with Western allies. So some Western allies, they have interest to protect this regime and to close their eyes about the violations. We are trying at the moment, and the NGOs, they are trying at the moment to have a resolution from the Human Rights Council about Saudi Arabia. And they are trying to have a special procedure about Saudi Arabia because we believe that will limitate the violations, and that will put some mechanism to monitor Saudi Arabia and to monitor the violations. But people, they still playing with time like the regime. And people in the council, people in EU, in United States, they still supporting the regime by somehow they are saying, okay, the regime, they promise us, give them time. It's not the right time to sign at the moment. It's not the right time to do the pressure at the moment. And the regime, they keep changing the narrative from time to time. The old narrative for the regime, they used to say, our people, they are conservative, and we have lots of extreme people against the reform. We want to do the reform, but our society, they don't accept it. Okay, how can we talk about society and judge the society and label them if they don't have their freedom of expression? Nobody heard the society. They silence. And they can't say anything if it's not exactly like what the regime wants. Anyone saying anything different than the regime, he will be behind the bars. This is basic and simple. At the moment, as I mentioned before, in the past, they used to have some human rights defenders in prisons and some outside and trying to manage. At the moment, there is no one to defend the human rights, no one at all. And the questions that I'm always received from journalists, I'm going to Saudi Arabia, can I meet activists inside Saudi Arabia? And can I talk to different voices inside the country? No, nobody can talk at the moment. And I have seen some articles charming Saudi Arabia, thanking Saudi Arabia for the reform and changing and great things in Saudi Arabia. What is it? They're saying cinema, it's business. So they should allow the business to do the business and not ban it in the past and force it at the end and control it by the government and saying, okay, this is the reform. We have cinema. Congratulations. And we banned the women from driving the car. And after all of these years, after all of these arrests, torture, all the violations because the ban for women driving, after that, they said, okay, we allowed women to drive the car. Thanks us. You are the last country in the world to allow women to drive the car. Why you are celebrating something silly like this? They should have these rights already. You should apologize to the society. You should say, sorry, we did a mistake. Not celebrate this thing and call it reform and success. So the journalists or people going to the country asking, we are going to the country, we want to talk to different people. And we went to the country and we have seen people, they are happy. Nobody protesting. All of them, they are smiling. And we ask people in the street, do you like the reform? All of them, they said, yeah, we like the reform. Because they can't say anything rather than, yeah, we like the reform, we like MPs, and we are supportive for the regime. Otherwise, they will be behind the bars or outside the country. And also the regime saying in the new narrative at the moment, those people behind the bars, they are dissident and they oppose some of our reform or changes or something. Yes, those people, they're allowed to oppose anything they don't believe on it. And one of them, he told me, he said, Walid al-Hidlul, Alias and Lina's and Lujain's brother, they said, he's opposing the regime and he's dissident and he must say no because they are torturing his sister behind the bars. Do you want him to be loyal for MBS and saying, okay, thank you because you're torturing my sister. I can't say no because I will be dissident and you will label me and you'll say, okay, he's evil, he's dissident. I'm really surprised when I heard that from European people or people from the United States. They are trying to justify the violations saying, this person is dissident, he's against the regime. Yes, they should be against the regime if the regime doing something wrong. And being dissident or saying no to the regime, it's not a crime. If you say that peacefully, this is not crime. So the narrative from the regime, unfortunately, it's accepted somewhere. And the regime, they have a lot of sources and they have a lot of money, and they are using this money to do the PR, not to do the reform. And the easiest thing to do, just to go to the ground, do the reform, free the prisoner of conscience. This will be the biggest reform, or this is the biggest PR for the regime if they are decide to do that. But they don't have the intention to do that, and they don't want to do any real reform, and they want to continue with this repression. And if there is no real pressure on the regime, we will have new Muammar Gaddafi or new Saddam Hussein. And Muammar Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, with the international pressure, they continue for a very long time. MBS, he can success and stay for a very long time if there is no real pressure. If he keep using the money to buy allies and to buy PR companies and continue with the violations, and with each moment he will start new PR, waiting for the moment like G20. After the G20, he will surprise us with something like the murder for Jamal Khashoggi and etc. What's the guarantee at the moment? MBS is not going to commit another crime like the murder for Jamal Khashoggi. There's no guarantee at all, because they have not paid the price yet. And as the MP mentioned here, the trial, it was joking, to be honest, by asking for execution for people because they said they did the crime themselves, but people they ordered the crime, they are still safe, still in the position, and people still congratulate them because they are safe. In Saudi Arabia, they are celebrating at the moment because Saud al-Qahtani, they announced he's innocent. They announced Saud al-Qahtani innocent, and they celebrate that. Saudi media, Saudi officials, including Turki al-Sheikh, he celebrated that in Saud al-Qahtani innocent. So if he go to continue and do these crimes, who will stop them? If we don't believe this regime is not just against our rights, because not a lot of people around the world care about the human rights, but even they are destroying the stability in the region. They are doing things, it's going to affect all the world. Having crisis with Qatar, crisis with Canada, crisis with Turkey, crisis with Iran, war in Yemen, all of this stability in the region and in the world, that will affect the world. So if we do want to stop this regime at the moment and put real pressure, having one position from all the EU's country, not having some pressure from Germany, then France having the advantage from that, selling more weapon. If we don't want to have the real pressure at the moment, what time we will have it? If the regime keeps surprising us by crime after crime, violations after violations. Last time they targeted Saudi journalist. He was writer in Washington Post. Next time, who knows? They will feel safe, and they will target another journalist. Could be Saudi activist, European activist, European journalist, and we will keep each violation or each crime separated from the others and try to deal with it, try to justify it. And this is what the regime trying to do. Justifying the war in Yemen, saying, okay, there is a threat from Iran, so we started the war in Yemen, and trying to find some justification for the torture for the women, trying to find some response about the murder for Jamal Khashoggi by saying, okay, we have a trial at the moment for those people. But if we have all of these crimes and violations in the sequence, look at it as a chain of violations and crimes all together, that will give us the real picture for the regime. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yahya. I'm also going to just pass it on again to Lina, who would like to comment.
So I'd just like to give 4 little comments on what Yahya just said. Concerning the change of narrative, I think it's very easy to see when you compare interviews of the same person with the 1 year interval, like MBS on October 2018 in the Bloomberg interview, they ask him, why are the women, including my sister, why are they in prison? And he says word by word, they are spies, they have contact with foreign agencies, they are here to destabilize the country. We have videos, tomorrow we'll show you videos. MBS 2018. MBS October 2019, on a 60 Minutes interview, they ask him again about my sister's case and the other women. He says, the trial is not in my hands. We have an independent judiciary. I can't do anything. The country is running with independent judiciary, and it's not up to me. Then they ask concerning the torture. He says, the country forbids torture. Our laws forbid torture. Islam forbids torture. But if it's true, I will make sure there's an investigation. That was in October 2019. We are in March 2020. No investigation whatsoever happened concerning my sister's torture, and we're still waiting for this. Concerning the silence, like Arij said and Yahya said, I can assure you silence doesn't work. The same period we stayed silent concerning my sister's disappearance and imprisonment, they were torturing her. When we started talking, all of a sudden everything was better. They put her in a normal prison, they started a trial, and they tried to make it seem like it's a fair trial. The thing is, we know that that's what they want. They want us to stay silent, because when we see the trolls on social media, when also people who are close to the government, they always tell us, what you're doing is harming your sister. What I want to tell them is that there are 1,000 other people in prison. No one knows about them, and if silence didn't help them. And also, if they believe that because we're talking, it could help harm my sister's situation, that means that it's not a fair trial, and they're judging her based on what I say. Concerning freedom of speech, it's funny because the Shura Council said it. They posted on Twitter that they admitted that the cybercrime law was used in an unfair way, or they exaggerated in the interpretation of the law, and that they even have stopped people and arrested them because they have tweeted. So Saudi Arabia basically says, yes, Saudi Arabia has arrested people because they have tweeted something. Just last point concerning Saud al-Qahtani. Yes, he was, so he's innocent of Jamal Khashoggi's murder. But I want to remind everyone that he is the one who was overseeing the torture of my sister. She recognized him, and he was the one telling the men who were torturing her what to do, where to put the electrocution, how to beat her, how to force feed her, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lina. I would like to thank all the panelists for their interventions and for really showing us the continuous human rights violations, the various continuous human rights violations in Saudi Arabia, from enforced disappearance to arbitrary detention, torture, unfair trials, executions after unfair trials, war crimes in Yemen, and more. I would like to quickly open the floor to some questions, if there are any, before we conclude. Yes, please. We'll just pass the microphone. 1 second.
No, thanks a lot. Salma with the International Service for Human Rights. So my question is for Francesca. I saw the written message that's saying basically if the European members should consider boycotting the event. I mean, speaking very pragmatically and realistically, like when we were discussing our advocacy, we discussed this and we said maybe we will not be able to achieve that. So what other ways can we actually use that as an opportunity for advocacy? So my question to you if that is not like, basically, if the answer to that question is like, no, we're not going to boycott, then what are the other possible things that basically you can do to ask member states to do that? We are asking states to demand the release of all of the women human rights defenders and all of those detained. And I think it would be useful to put that as the number one ask, basically. Like, if the European member states would ask something, then that would be it. And then the second question is that I heard from the EU Special Representative on Human Rights, Gilmore, that the Saudi Human Rights Commission are engaging with them, and then he requested a meeting, requested a visit to Saudi Arabia, and that's all I know. But if you have any information about what that is, and how is the engagement of the special representative with the Saudis, and how, like, can you basically from your role influence that? Yeah, thanks.
Can we take another question?
Yeah.
Before we get back to
But I don't need the mic because I talk very loudly. I will ask Mr. Asiri. You should have a lot of courage to say all of that here, because even the Saudi government is listening to you. So how could you do that and feel still secure? Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ines Osman from Mina Rights Group. Just a follow-up question to what Salma has raised and some of the things that Yahya, you said regarding the Human Rights Commission. We do see that there is an increasing campaign by this commission to meet with a lot of foreign officials and members of Congress or members of different parliaments of various European countries. I'm just curious actually to hear from Arij and Lina what their impression has been of, I'm assuming, your communication with them. Because I feel like we see them a lot as part of this PR campaign, but we also don't hear that much from families of victims as to what the involvement of this commission is, considering they're supposed to, be receiving complaints and having complaints forms on their website and phone numbers you can call. I'm just curious to hear from you what your engagement with them has been, and the engagement maybe of other families of victims.
Yeah, we'll start straight away with the answers, I guess. Francesca?
Okay, I will start. So, about the G20. We just received a few days ago the answer from Borrell, and in fact he says that the EU, as a full member of G20, will continue to take part at the appropriate level in the various meetings scheduled by Saudi Arabia and G20. So that's the point. I mean, it's what you said. Huh? We are part of this. It could be an occasion to discuss. I mean, the weapon of European Union is also dialogue, okay? So I could agree. But the important thing, this thing that we wanted to arise with this text proposed to Borrell, is that we have to arise this situation and the facts. I mean, there could be also maybe an opportunity to go there and to say, okay, we are here, but what's happening here? So I think that at this point, we should maybe follow this way. I mean, go there, but not just follow our eyes and discuss about the program proposed by Saudi Arabia, but we are there, and so we try to, as Saudi Arabia will be under the eyes of the world in that period, maybe it could be an occasion to put some particular issues about Saudi Arabia under the attention of all the world. That's the first point. Second point, honestly, I don't know about Gilmore and the visit. I can't answer you. I think that probably the European Parliament organized a visit in Saudi Arabia last week. I can say that usually go there or in another country is not an endorsement. I mean, when a delegation of the European Parliament goes to a country is to meet people, of course, but not to endorse, to raise the problem, to discuss among them, also to raise the problem with the public opinion, and also to try to, I don't know, on the field to keep the elements to analyze. For sure, we have done to think about it. I mean, if they go there, probably they will prepare something, but this is how it usually works.
We'll go for the ladies first. Okay. Arish, maybe you want to start?
Sure. So to answer your question about reaching out to like the Congress and U.S. officials, at least from my end, for me, I found it very, very helpful. Not to the extent that I wish to, because these things take a long time. But as an American citizen, we found a lot of, at least, emotional support and follow-up. It does help. It takes a lot of work and a lot of follow-up, but it does actually, it does help in a way. What really I would like to say is also, I'm more concerned of why the US president is not taking as strong action as the Congress or as, the State Department. I mean, there are even US citizens who are in jail or who are detained, who are tortured, and he haven't said even a word. The same thing with Secretary Pompeo. We haven't heard anything public condemning these actions. And what really, disappointing is that Saudi Arabia is a very close ally. So it's not too hard to say, to talk about that or, push for their freedom. I wish there is a stronger advocacy, there is stronger, stand from my government, from the US government towards these human rights abuses, because obviously they are not like any just dismissible human rights abuses. They are extreme. There is torture, there is disappearance. As American citizens, we suffered for 2 years. The Congress themselves have met with us and saw the distress we're living in. They showed really concern about the situation we're in, the pain we're going through. And so definitely it's not something that can be just dismissed. Does it help? Yes, it helps, but it doesn't, it needs a lot of work and it needs a lot of follow-up and push. Probably I'm just hopeful and optimistic in general, but I believe in consistency and just keep going, keep advocating and talking until, your voice is heard, near or far, your voice have to be heard.
Maybe if I can just say, if I understood this question correctly, that also went or is also aiming at talking about the Saudi National Human Rights Institution, right? And like what that actually offers victims. Is there any recourse? Are they to be taken serious? You as like members, family members of individuals suffering from human rights violations, are they responsive? Have you reached out to the sort of National Human Rights Institution?
In Saudi Arabia?
Yes.
Yes. My family have reached out to them, and we submitted like pages after pages describing our situation in details. And that was in the first few months of my brother's disappearance. And we still haven't heard anything. Follow up, we kept following up, and there is still nothing. So in terms of human rights agencies in Saudi Arabia, I'm sorry to say they are useless, completely useless. I don't know why they are there, basically. I don't know if it's just the lack of work ethics or not understanding what human rights really are about, or they're just there as a cover-up. I'm really frustrated with human rights agencies in Saudi Arabia, and I mean, their existence or not doesn't make any difference, seriously. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, I totally agree with her because we also sent many letters to the Human Rights Commission and we've never got any response. And more than that, they're trying to push my sister to stop communicating with them. When Lujain wrote a letter to the Human Rights Commission one day, and when my parents went to visit her, they took the paper to transfer it to the Human Rights Commission. On his way back to our house in Saudi Arabia, my father got a call, and they said, Lujain wants to see you. And when he went back to the prison, she wasn't there. And they just told him, give us back the paper you have to give to the Human Rights Commission. So I don't know if they're scared to do anything, but if they're scared, then they're useless. You know, it's funny because they're so active outside of Saudi Arabia. So it's, why can't they do anything in Saudi Arabia? It's frustrating, yeah.
And it's frustrating even more that you feel that they're more of a cover-up than advocating for human beings, for those people who are suffering from absurd human rights violations. No action at all, no follow-up at all. It's completely zero action. So it seems like more of a cover-up than actually being there to protect human rights. And I understand they're not independent, which makes it, you know, even worse. So I don't know how this can be corrected, but definitely needs to be corrected.
Okay, so that's a very clear answer as to them being more part of the whitewashing machinery and PR offensive than helping it. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, it's clear they are not. They are trying to reach NGOs, reach diplomatic, reach everyone outside the country, but not reaching the victims and their families, because they are not defending the human rights. They are defending the violations itself. Regarding to your question. Honestly, the regime, when they are doing crises, for example, the crisis with Canada, it was to warn another country and to stop another country. When they did torture for someone, that's to warn another one, to silence another one. So when they are doing all of these violations, they want to silence everyone, not just activists, NGOs, media, and countries. If we listen to that and be silenced, that means they success, and they will continue because they know this is the recipe. Do something crazy, and it will work. But we need to continue. We need to take the risk, and we need to challenge the violations. Without any challenge, the violations will increase. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe just as a conclusion, I think what we've also learned today from your testimonies is that, but staying silent is not an option. It doesn't help anyone. That goes for the families of victims. But I think that also goes somewhat for the international community. I mean, last year has really seen like an increased voice through UN statements, EU resolutions, an increased pressure on the Saudi authorities by speaking out, by doing public advocacy, which I think have also brought like some positive developments. You know, the release of some of the women human rights defenders, I think, were a glimpse of hope that actually speaking out does have an impact. And I think that's maybe we can also conclude by that call that individuals should continue speaking out to support their fellow activists and victims of human rights violations. And we look forward to hearing more from members of the global state community, the EU and the UN to put pressure on the Saudi authorities. And we all hope that that will improve the situation. A special thank you to all my panelists for your interventions, and of course also to the Right Livelihood Award Foundation and FIDH for sponsoring this event, and thank you all for attending.